Hello, welcome to GovGeeks Assemble. Level up your 9 to 5 on 95. I'm Javier.
And I'm Karen.
And together we are
The GovGeeks.
The GovGeeks. Exactly. It's so fun. Well, we have a great show for you guys today. We have an exclusive interview with a very important person.
Yes, we have Love Rutledge here with us today. She is an executive coach and host of the FedUpward Podcast. She's also a current public servant. She's chief of staff for the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Readiness.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, just so well credentialed, such a nice person as well. We've had the opportunity to chat on her podcast as well, FedUpward as well. So excellent stuff. The moment that we have all been waiting for. We're excited to introduce Love. Love, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Yeah. I'm just thinking about how we started this awesome relationship of ours, partnering together and all sorts of cool things. We had the chance to be on your show, which we were so grateful for.
Yes.
I mean, it's an amazing piece of public service. You're able to share so much great information with so many people. It's just a lovely thing.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, what you guys is so amazing and what you do is so important. And I think we have a great community of federal government supporters in the DC area and beyond that are able to share resources and information the way we do. And I appreciate your, friendship and professionalism and what you do. Excited to exchange ideas and be on each other's podcasts and make sure that federal employees are getting all the information they need to be successful.
All the information they need to be successful, definitely. Because honestly, there's a lot of stuff out there that I think all of us had to kind of learn through trial and error, some challenges and things. So if another person just had the opportunity to learn a couple of things ahead of time, oh my gosh, they can save them years of grief and challenge.
Definitely want to share the information from experiences that we've gone through. So to help others.
So here's a quick view of your website, and we're going to include the website in the show notes below as well. So you can go ahead and get registered for the podcast, listen to all the great news and information that she has as well. And also what's just so great is you have the chance to bring on some really excellent speakers and guest presenters.
Yeah, we were just listening to your most recent one with Mr. John Wilson and the stay interviews concept, which I thought was really interesting. And it was just very helpful to kind of hear somebody from his level on how to manage not only performance, but having those regular conversations, which I think are key as a supervisor, as a leader, just in public service in general.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I try to have a wide variety of folks on the show to talk about not just, things you might find on the Office of Personnel Management website, which does take some time to weed through and some amplification, right? To figure out what they're talking about. But also folks like John Wilson, like you mentioned, to talk about the day-to-day skills that might help us retain talent, bring in the right people, keep people motivated. I think getting burned out right now is probably the most prevalent problem facing federal employees after a couple of years of the pandemic, working from home, kids at home in many cases, and just a lot of additional pressures that nobody had before. And so I think his concept of how he implements stay interviews was so important. I had to have him on the show after hearing him talk about some other human capital related explorations that he's done within his organization.
Absolutely.
And also, before we forget, so we just wanted to help make sure that everyone is aware, none of us are here on our official government capacity. We all have our ethics and outside activities requests and all that stuff.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. So while I am a Department of Defense employee and have been for almost 22 years now, I do the podcast and coaching in a personal capacity outside of business hours. So I know you guys are in the same boat where you are federal employees, but then you do your best outside of work hours to help folks in their careers to move forward and get, like we said before, their hands on the information they need.
Yeah, a labor of love, if you will.
That's honestly really what it is. Absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of times folks get a little bit consumed with what it means to be a government employee, but the idea that you can have so much fulfillment, not only in your 9 to 5, but also in other aspects as well. So there's plenty of things that you can do in terms of fulfillment. Honestly, also as a great source of income as well. I've worked with a lot of colleagues and friends who are investors in like real estate and a couple of other things. So that's something nice to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Side hustles are allowed, right? In the federal government, you've got to make sure that you go through the appropriate ethics checks and notifications within your organization. And as long as there's not a conflict of interest, you can continue to pursue lots of passions while still being a federal employee and a clearance holder.
Yeah,
exactly right. Well, we have a couple of questions that we're excited to ask you. I know we were talking about a couple of them as we were getting ready for this interview. So if you could please tell us a little bit about your career field.
Sure. So I have spent 22 years in government. Like I said, the first 15 or so were in budgeting and financial management. And then I pivoted and started working in force management and readiness within the Department of Defense. So big pivot out of the sort of green eye shade, bean counter function, right, into something different. But I will say one of the things that has been common, and the thread that I can kind of pull throughout my entire career, is being able to communicate. And that was so important when I was in the comptroller world, because it wasn't so much about the numbers, it was about telling the story and helping Congress understand what it was we needed to do to support the warfighter so that they could give us the resources we needed. And then when I pivoted to other parts of the department, I would say that was the skill set that was really most important throughout. So I've done a lot of different things. I was a certified defense financial manager, and I've gone through a couple of developmental programs within the Department of Defense. Now I'm at the Office of the Secretary of Defense, as you mentioned before. So worked at a couple of different levels in the different departments within the Department of Defense. And I think that's something that's really critical for people to realize, that they can move around laterally, that's really important for not only building skills, but also for building networks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, we said at the very beginning of this that you were awesome. And just listening to that description, I mean, that's amazing. You've had a fantastic career.
Right.
I've been really fortunate. I mean, I came into the government thinking, I'll move to the DC area and then I'll find a job I really want to do. And I never left. And I've been in for 22 years. And the government has been amazing and super generous. I've gotten 2 master's degrees paid for by the government. So that is something else you can think about as you move up in your career, is how the government can help you, right, in terms of building your skills on the job training, but also through education that you can take with you even if you leave the government. And that's been really important to me every few years, to do some sort of developmental assignment, get another degree or a certification, because that just keeps things interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of growth opportunities that's connected with that. So it's not necessarily just, you get this one job and you find your cubicle and there you stay for 20, 30 years until you retire. There's so much growth in education, experiences. It sounds like your career is a model for how others can really find a lot of joy and commitment and fulfillment in their work.
Right, which kind of ties into our next question for you is, what's the best advice you can share to having a fulfilling career in public service rather than simply holding a job?
Right. Having that little countdown clock on their desk, to retirement, 30 years from now, just you wait.
That's not a bad thing.
If that's what you want and that's your fulfillment.
Yeah, absolutely. That was not what I wanted. If I had stayed in the same position or even in the same organizational structure for my entire career, I think I would be bored out of my mind, just because I like change every few years. I think it's important to move around. It's important to take on new challenges and maybe to take the jobs that aren't the most coveted so that you can get some experiences that you wouldn't otherwise get. So the hardest jobs that I've had have definitely been the most fulfilling looking back at them, even if at the time they were super challenging and I was pulling my hair out. So I would also offer to folks not to be afraid to manage and lead teams, because that's really how you gain an understanding of how the organization really works and what it takes to keep people motivated, which I think is really the toughest challenge within federal government, because we don't have a lot of tools in terms of financial compensation, right? We have some non-monetary awards, we have small cash awards, but really where we win is on mission and service and keeping people motivated in that concept of having a public service mindset and fulfilling that for people. And so constantly reminding folks what it is they're doing and what it is they're supporting at a higher level is really critical to keeping folks from hitting that burnout wall that I think a lot of us have faced at different times in our careers.
Absolutely. But there's different avenues and there's different options. I mean, government, there's so many different places that you can go, so many different things that you can do. What I really admire about what you've described about your career and your process is that you've been an active participant in it, where you identify, you grow, you look at different opportunities. It's not just, sitting there like waiting for something to happen to you as well. You're able to kind of grow your own career.
Yeah, that's so important because really the best advice I got early on in my career was that no one's going to care about my career more than I do. And
exactly,
nothing could be more true. Your supervisors, your managers, your mentors, they all might spend a lot of time with you and be very generous and knowledgeable. But the bottom line is they have their own issues to worry about, their own careers to navigate through, and their own teams to manage. And so the more you can advocate for yourself throughout your career, the better off you'll be.
Yeah, we often use that example of, you could be doing an awesome job. You're excelling at what you're doing. You're great at what you do. And you're sitting there and you're like, oh, they're going to notice me any day and give me that promotion. They're going to see all the great work I'm doing, and which they probably are. But it's also about you getting yourself out there.
Right.
And being in the front of the line. So when they do think of that position, they say, oh, that's right. Love mentioned she was interested in doing something else. And I know she's great at what she does. Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and see if she's interested.
And they're not mind readers. They're not sitting there going like, I know that Love really wants this. They're not like, Professor Charles Xavier just reading everyone's mind.
Right. And that's so important if you are interested in something new to let folks know. That's one of the great things about the federal government is that you can't be punished for looking for a new job. You're not going to get fired because your supervisor finds out you're looking and exploring opportunities. You can let your supervisor know, assuming you have, a positive relationship, and they can help you. And you can't be punished for that, which is, different from the private sector. In some cases, if you are found out, if you're searching, there might be repercussions for that. And so it's really nice to have that stability while also being able to search out new opportunities. And like you guys said, it's so important to let people know so that you're top of mind when those opportunities arise.
Yeah,
absolutely. So another curious question is really who has been the most influential or who has influenced you in a positive way in your career? Or heck, even in a negative way that you took as a growth opportunity?
Well, I think you all can relate to this, and I'm sure your listeners, your viewers can too. We've all had terrible supervisors. We've all had bad managers, and we learn what we can from those experiences, right? But I think some of the most impactful experiences that I've had in terms of mentorship have been the first few supervisors that I had in the government who really taught me the value of advocating for myself, not being afraid to speak up in situations where I might be, the lowest ranking person in the room, but still might have more knowledge on a specific subject than others. I think that's a really important piece of advice to give to folks is don't be afraid to speak up when something seems not quite right, whether it's from an ethics perspective or just a subject matter perspective and whatever you're doing, because sometimes you will be the most knowledgeable person in the room. And sometimes you have to be the loudest. I'm sure you can hear my kids in the background. I'm having to talk over them, right? So I appreciate your patience with that. So early supervisors in my career were really important in that regard, and that they stressed really the importance of being confident and knowing the subject matter well, and then exploring new opportunities like we mentioned before.
Definitely. So along those lines, what would you say is the hardest one lesson that you've had?
Yeah, I think the hardest lesson that I have learned the hard way for sure is that sometimes sticking it out through a difficult time in your career, working for someone you don't enjoy, can yield really important benefits for you in a lot of different ways. So here's an example for me when I was kind of in the process of becoming a mom and then a new mom of two kids. I have two kids that are fairly close together in age. I worked for someone who I really didn't enjoy working for very much and felt a bit marginalized. But what that allowed me to do was focus on my family and recovering and losing the baby weight, getting back on my feet and kind of building my confidence back up after having 2 kids, and coming back in after kind of being in the job, out of the job, in the job, out of the job, out on maternity leave. And it allowed me to really get my confidence back and get back on my feet. And then I could look for another job where I could be impactful, where I could work for someone who did recognize my talents and could leverage me really well. So even though that felt like a lull professionally, I don't know how I could have been a mom and focused on that part of my life when my kids were really young as much as I did if I had super high expectations placed on me during that time. Mm-hmm. So at the time, it felt like, gosh, I can't believe this person is marginalizing me and this is terrible. But in hindsight, it afforded me a lot of opportunities. So even if you're in a situation like that, see what you can focus your time on temporarily until that better opportunity comes up, because it might be a blessing in disguise.
That's a great lesson and a great perspective to have maybe not while going through it necessarily, being right. able to look back and have that hindsight view.
Yeah. And what's so great is that you took a potentially challenging situation and you thought, well, where is the value? Where's the benefit? How can I use this? And amazing, because I think the time that you spent with your kids obviously was, very, very well spent. Mm-hmm. Investing in that time while still managing your career. And then as you felt ready and prepared, it's like a launch pad. You just, mm-hmm. Left from there and onwards and upwards.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Yeah, at the time it was difficult, but looking back, it was perfect, and it was what I needed. So yeah, you can never tell
what you needed at the time. Yeah,
that is so cool. I'm super happy about that one. That's like thrilling. That's really good.
That's a really great story.
Well, yeah, I know you had some challenges as well as you were considering career, going back and forth between different things with, being out with pregnancy and such.
Oh yeah, it's definitely tough, and trying to still have that value with the organization and show that I can still do this, right. Which kind of like you were mentioning could lead to, get into burnout territory, right? Where we try not to do, which I know you've mentioned that's part of helping to keep morale, is to make sure people have, a voice and everything. So I wonder, for our next question, what do you believe is key to building employee morale?
Yeah. And as an executive coach, I'm sure this is something that you have conversations with people about a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. On both sides of the equation. And I think what it boils down to is clear communication on both sides of that conversation. I think it's really hard for employees sometimes to speak honestly, candidly with their supervisors about what problems they're experiencing. And we're all guilty of this at certain times in our careers, where we let something fester, or we're particularly dissatisfied with some aspect of a coworker, or how they're treating us, or a process that isn't working the way it should. We all know we work in bureaucracies, right? And if we're not careful, those gears just grind to a halt. So not speaking up and letting things fester is the worst thing that we can do. So communicating candidly with your management and your peers. And then from the opposite direction, and this came out in the Stay Interviews episode of my podcast that I did recently, was, having sit downs with your employees as often as possible, or virtually, if that's the way you're working, to check their pulse, see what's going on, what's frustrating them at the time, what's going well, and what tools do they need to be successful that they don't have right now? What obstacles are you putting in their way as a supervisor that you might not be aware of? Ask these questions and be prepared to act on the feedback you receive. I think those are the most important things that we can do to try to keep morale up. And then to remember, of course, that people are human. And so they're going to need breaks. They're going to need to take time off. And we can't think about time off, whether it's half days, whole days, weeks, whatever, as something that's detrimental to the mission. It is critical to whatever your mission is to allow people to take breaks and have time off. Now, we all know that has to be managed and scheduled, and we have to deconflict time off so that the mission continues and things get done. But allowing folks to take a knee when they need to is really important. And then I would also encourage people to check out their employee assistance programs. If you're really in over your head and your supervisor or your manager isn't capable or armed with the right tools to help you, you can get free coaching. You can get free therapy. If you're a federal employee, every major agency and department has an EAP, an employee assistance program. Ask your HR specialist about it. And so if you're experiencing something that is just outside of your control and above your manager's ability to help you with, there's still other help available, people who are trained in those areas. And then you can also seek out folks like us who have maybe been there and done that, and who offer coaching services to help people through the mechanics of the day-to-day grind of working in a bureaucracy. And it can be helpful too, just to be heard. So those are all ways we can try to nip burnout in the bud. I mean, it's hard. We've all been through it. I don't know about